Hey there, it's me, your favorite beginner Factorio player. And Space Age is finally out. So that means it's time for another 1,000 or so hours spent on this game instead of enjoying the many wonders of life. But as much new content as there is in Space Age, and trust me, there is a lot of new content, the early game is pretty much exactly the same as before. We might eventually be building massive spaceships, but for now we're stuck hitting rocks and using burner miners. Well, the early game is mostly unchanged, but there are a few new things. Like for example this research we just completed without even having a lab. These are the new milestone technologies. In this case, smelting 50 iron plates unlocks steam power. But other than that, it's still the same old burner phase. Research assembling machines, get some belt automation going, build the standard hand-fed red science setup, and get some early automation up for inserters and mining drills. I'm gonna be going a bit fast in these early parts, since it's pretty much unchanged from before Space Age. If you want a more in-depth video on the early game and general 1.0 Factorio stuff, you can watch my old Megabase video. Anyway, to make it a bit more unique, I did something I don't usually do and made myself a starter base blueprint. This is stage 1 of 2 of the blueprint, and it'll be giving us most of the essential buildings. And because I got carried away with building, we get our first visit from the biters. Turns out, there's a single nest right next to the boilers, so it's not too big of a problem. And here's the second stage of the starter base blueprint. Here we get the red and green science, and the rest of the supplies we'll need to build a real base. There was probably a better place to put this though than on top of a giant forest. Now with that done, it's just a matter of chewing through all available research and planning out our actual base. Also, I'm gonna use any excess iron to make red belts, because who wants to be using yellow belts outside of a starter base? Also some ammo and gun turrets for the most fun activity in Factorio. Turret creeping biter nests. I'm playing this run on a default settings rail world, since I'm essentially going in blind and didn't want to deal with biters expanding into undefended corners of my Nauvis base while I'm spending hours trying to figure out how the other planets work. It might make the game easier, but honestly it's probably the best way to experience a blind first playthrough of Space Age. Or maybe I just hate building massive perimeter walls. That's also a possibility. I also decided to do something extremely stupid this run and started building a rail base before I had robots. So I spent the next 2 hours placing down rails and mining drills by hand like some savage. I didn't save myself the pain of doing all of this, but thankfully I can save you the pain of watching it, so... Please don't be stupid like me, and rush robots before going for a giant train network. My wrists still haven't recovered. Well, anyway, that's done now. So let's get to base building. Alright, now we have the beginnings of a beautiful main bus. And here's another blueprint I made before the run, an early to mid-game mall. Usually I don't include links to my blueprints, cause I don't think they're any good, but I'll add links to the starter base and this mall in the description, in case anyone wants them. Now to rebuild red and green science, and add military science as well. And whereas in 1.0 military science was technically optional, now it's absolutely mandatory, for reasons you'll see later. The next thing we need is blue science, which of course means oil. Thankfully, I've already cleared out an oil field, so all we need to do is set up the pump jacks and get it onto a train. In hindsight, there's now a better way to set up refineries, since you can flip their fluid inputs now, but I forgot that's a thing while playing, so old design it is. Next, we're gonna speed through plastic and sulfur, engines, red circuits, some modules for later, and finally blue science. Once we have that, double the refineries, and set up oil cracking so there's no oil related worries for the rest of the game. Another cool change is that now wires aren't items you need to craft anymore, they're just buttons you click in the UI, and that's just a 10 out of 10 change. Next up is of course just knocking out all the intermediates we need for robots, and the robots themselves. Probably took like 2 hours longer than needed because of my horrible planning, but hey, better late than never. Also, the biters are starting to be a problem with our pollution cloud as big as it is, so it's time to bring out the universal problem solver. Ah, tanks. How horrible would the world be without them? With the biters not being a threat for now, it's time to get working on rocket components. Rocket control units aren't a thing anymore, so now rockets take blue circuits as input. Start turning all the light oil into rocket fuel, and of course chuck what little copper we have left into LDS. And while I could just start launching rockets now, and it probably would be the smarter play, I wanna be finished with my Nauvis base before I go off onto other planets. So that means yellow and purple science. And setting up a train stop for sulfuric acid so we can start mining uranium. You'd be surprised at just how much power some of the later game buildings eat up. And because there's like a million other things to do to ensure a stable base capable of supporting interplanetary travel, let's run through a few of them real quick. Blue belts, concrete, refined concrete, extra green circuits, another copper mine to keep up with said green circuits, another 30 minutes of biter exploding, uranium processing, some more biter clearing, filling the mining drills with efficiency modules so my power grid doesn't completely collapse, automating the supplies for nuclear power since it'll probably take another 3 hours to have enough with how thin my resources are spread. And finally, we can start doing the cool stuff. The first thing you'll need in big quantities are these space platform foundations. They eat up a lot of steel, so I hope you prepared some extra iron mines. And here's our rocket silo. You can get these as early as blue science now, and launching rockets is way cheaper than it was before. But that cost reduction is offset by the fact that we'll be launching thousands of them. The first thing to do with your rocket silo is use it to launch a space platform starter pack, which I assume you can guess by the name, creates our first space platform. And I'm telling you right now, space platforms are the coolest thing. Basically, you get to build your own spaceship / mini factory in space. And that's why you need to launch so many rockets, since everything you want to put on a space platform needs to come up via a rocket from the surface. There are several unique components for space platforms. These asteroid collectors, which grab the nearby asteroid chunks and bring them onto the platform for processing, crushers, which turn the asteroids into usable resources, and also cargo bays and thrusters, which we won't be using on this platform, since its only intended use will be getting us space science, not traveling to other planets. Space science is actually very simple to produce, needing just iron plates, ice, and carbon, all of which are materials you get for free from asteroids. This platform might be a bit confusing to look at, but it's actually pretty simple. I'll be using the new read whole belt function to monitor how much of each asteroid I have currently on the outer belt, and using decider combinators, I'll stop my grabbers from picking up any extra asteroids above the preset amount I want. It's basically a sushi belt, but made much simpler thanks to the new circuit options. Asteroids come in 3 flavors: metallic, carbonic, and oxide, giving iron, carbon, and ice respectively when crushed. After crushing, the iron goes straight into furnaces to make iron plates. Then the plates go onto another sushi belt alongside the carbon and ice using the exact same design. And then our finished space ions goes on another looping belt to be inserted into the platform hub, and from there gets sent down to Nauvis. This is only my very first basic space platform that doesn't even fly, and I already love these things. And doing that gave me a craving for sushi, so I made another sushi belt for the science. It's so simple now with the whole belt reader that you don't even need combinators or to wire up the output inserters. Just set the amount of each science you want on the inserters and it just works. And with space science now in the labs, the first thing we research is logistics system. Yeah, it got moved from yellow science to space science and I didn't realize until I had already built yellow science, don't ask. Also, let's start making some tier 2 modules. They're a considerable upgrade over tier 1s, and we won't be getting tier 3s for a while, since they're locked behind different planets. Now let's use another massive new mechanic, quality. I'm not gonna go in depth on quality, since that would be a separate 15-minute video by itself, but all you need to know for now is that quality modules give a small chance whenever you craft an item of getting a better version of that item. It's mostly a massive resource sink, and largely not necessary. If you don't like it, you don't need to use it. It does come in quite handy for space platform parts in particular though. There's more complicated stuff you can do with quality later, but for now it's just set and forget. Also, that uranium processing from earlier has finally gotten us 40 enriched uranium, so let's start Kovarax. It's always good to get these lengthy processes working before going off on some long project, and I would say different planets are a pretty long project. Now let's launch up a second space platform, aptly named Spaceship ? Since I have no idea if I'll actually manage to get it flying or not. And here's the spaceship mostly done. Let's pretend that was a creative decision on my part and not me forgetting to hit record. Well, you sadly won't see me building the spaceship, but I can still explain how it works. The asteroid collecting works exactly the same as before. Sushi belt and stopping the grabbers from working when we have enough. Same thing with the asteroid processing, but this time we're making sure to output all asteroid materials onto only one side of the belt. That's because the other side will be used exclusively for ammo. While the asteroids around Nauvis are small and harmless, when going to other planets we start encountering bigger asteroids that will destroy the spaceship unless broken down by gun turrets. And since ammo is inefficient to ship up via rocket, we want to be making ammo on the platform itself. Back here we have our thrusters, and 5 of them for a spaceship this small is comically overkill. I just had no idea how fast these things travel. For a first ship, probably just stick with 1 to 3 thrusters. For the thrusters to work, they need both fuel and oxidizer, and those are made with water and either iron or carbon. We get water by melting ice in a chemical plant, and we can get the iron and carbon straight off the sushi belt. And if you're planning to leave your ship parked around other planets, you'll need gun turret coverage on the sides as well. Finally, seal it all off with walls, and fill up whatever space is left with solar panels. There we go, our very first spaceship. The first planet I'll be going to in this run is Vulcanus, and as you can see, space platforms have schedules much like trains. From here you can automate pretty much everything. In this case we'll be using circuit conditions, so it won't start flying until both tanks of fuel and oxidizer are full. But sadly these ships are a bit slow to get going since there aren't many asteroids around Nauvis. So for now we'll leave it to build up a stockpile of fuel and ammo, and meanwhile finish up some things down in our base, like putting down a second rocket silo. Trust me, later in the game you'll feel like you can never have enough rocket silos. And also build a whole nuclear power plant, since my base has been permanently struggling with power since I started launching rockets. This is a design from one of my older videos. It's not optimal by any means with all the changes to how fluids work, but it'll do the job for now. And of course we want a decent amount of building supplies with us when we land on a new planet. So enjoy watching these rockets. This amount of rocket launching would have been mega base level in 1.0. And here this is still considered the early game. Well, after sitting around for 20 minutes, I think we finally have enough stuff on our spaceship, so let's take a ride up there. And just look how cool this animation is. Do you see now why I was so excited to get to this part of the video? Up here I brought a lot, but probably still not all the things I'll need on Vulcanus. In hindsight, I should have added some cargo bays for more storage space. Well, time to see if this thing can actually fly. And here you can see why we needed gun turrets and tons of ammo. These asteroids would absolutely wreck our ship if not shot down, but it seems to be holding steady. So let's take a ride in our trusty space capsule and check out this new planet. Welcome, dear viewers, to Vulcanus, a barren, cliff-infested wasteland covered in lava. And this is how items coming from a space platform look when there's no landing pad. Honestly, still pretty cool. Now the first thing to do on any new planet is set up some early solar panels to kickstart power. Solar power on Vulcanus is 400% as effective as it is on Nauvis, so that makes it a pretty viable way of getting power. But I don't like solar panels, so I'll only use them for a bit. So what else do we have to work with here? Well, we have rocks that give tiny amounts of iron, copper and stone, trees that give carbon, and a big patch of coal. Not much to go off at the start, but that'll change pretty quick. For now, just slam down some furnaces and start smelting the ores. There's also wells of free sulfuric acid you can pump straight from the ground like crude oil. And this new resource called calcite. It's pretty important. Using the sulfuric acid, plus calcite and coal, we can use simple coal liquefaction, which gives us a pretty tiny amount of heavy oil, but it's better than nothing. Next, we want to use the carbon from the trees, plus this new ore called tungsten, to make tungsten carbide. That's to make this, the foundry. The foundry is Vulcanus' special production building. It's basically an insanely supercharged furnace with its own special recipes, and it also has an inbuilt 50% productivity bonus. And it can craft itself. So from now on we'll be getting a free foundry for every 2 we make. Next we're gonna solve our power issue. Can't run a base on 50 solar panels after all. Using this new recipe, we can turn the free sulfuric acid into 500 degree steam, which we can then feed straight into steam turbines to produce a very respectable 250 megawatts of power. Now that that's taken care of, let's show off the real power of the foundry: lava processing. You can use offshore pumps on the lava here on Vulcanus and feed that lava into a foundry along with a tiny amount of calcite to make molten iron or molten copper. And then using another foundry, you can cast said molten metals into anything from iron, copper and steel plates to iron gears, copper wire, iron sticks, or even LDS. It also spits out a ridiculous amount of stone though. But here's another cool thing you can do with the lava. Chuck your garbage into it to destroy it. Man, I love this expansion. Now let's just figure out a repeatable design using foundries. That should work. And now we have basically infinite iron, steel and copper, since lava itself is an infinite resource. Another not so easily accessible thing we need is water. And as you can probably tell by the surroundings, we won't find any here. Thankfully, there's a recipe to condense steam back into water, so that free sulfuric acid is coming in handy again. Now let's start making an actual base. Using the foundries, I'll make iron gear straight from molten iron, use our free metals to make green circuits, and then shove all those resources into provider chests. Then using the robots I brought over from Nauvis, I can make a nice little bot mall, since the supplies I took with me were kinda starting to run out. Next, we're gonna want a lot of ammo. You'll see why in a bit. Also, now that we have water, we can start cracking down the heavy oil into light oil and petroleum. And since collecting carbon from trees manually was starting to get old, let's automate it. All you need is coal and sulfuric acid, so it's easy enough. But we still need tungsten. And the only patch of tungsten ore is outside of our save zone. Save from what, you might be asking? Well, from this guy. Vulcanus is home to these giant worms called demolishers. They have ridiculous health and tons of health regen. They're also very territorial, so any building placed on their territory will cause the demolishers to come over and flatten everything. Probably the easiest way of killing them would be to bring over uranium tank shells from Nauvis, but I wasn't smart enough to do that on the first trip. Thankfully, you can make up for any amount of stupidity with an even higher amount of guns. Also, demolishers are rather weak to poison. Not weak enough to die to it, but weak enough to where it can mostly counteract their regeneration and let the gun turrets do their magic. Well, here goes. Huh, that actually worked better than I expected. I barely lost any gun turrets. Well, I'm not complaining. And now that the Demolisher is gone, his previous territory is safe for the rest of the game, which also gives us access to this tungsten patch, and a great opportunity to show off the big mining drill, the other special building from Vulcanus. It has a mining speed of 2.5, a 13 by 13 area, and 50% resource drain, which just means that it'll deplete ore patches slower than a normal mining drill. It's also the only drill that can mine tungsten, so that's a plus. Now that we have tungsten, we can finally automate the last of the Vulcanus processes. Combine the tungsten with carbon to make tungsten carbide, and also combine it with molten iron to make tungsten plates. Now we can not only make as many foundries and big mining drills as we want, but also this planet's science pack. Foundries craft crazy fast, and have 4 module slots on top of their baseline 50% productivity, so just these 2 machines will be enough to produce a respectable amount of science. And as if foundries didn't have enough uses already, they can also make belts. So let's get some belt automation going. Now the only thing left to do is to make sure we can consistently launch rockets from here, so all our new goodies can be delivered to other planets. So let's get the easy things out of the way first. Rocket fuel is literally just light oil, so not much to say there. Some electric engines to actually be able to craft rocket silos, and use the petroleum to make plastic for LDS and red circuits. We already have copper and green circuits, so red circuits are pretty easy. And of course we have infinite sulfuric acid straight from the ground, so that's blue circuits. LDS can be made in foundries using both molten iron and molten copper, along with some plastic. Once again, with how ridiculous foundries are, this is all we'll need. And just like that, we have our rocket. We won't be able to launch hundreds of rockets per hour like on Nauvis, but it'll get the job done. All we need to do now is request a few thousand science packs up on our spaceship, and the rocket silo will be automatically filled up by our robots. Well, we've done all we came here for, so let's hop in the rocket and get back to the spaceship. I skipped forward a bit, and now we have 100 big mining drills, 35 foundries, and 5,000 metallurgic science packs on board with us heading back to Nauvis. All in all, I'd say pretty productive first trip to Vulcanus. Well, our first spaceship did an okay job, but it takes forever to refuel and has very limited cargo space, so I felt like making a better one. And when creating the new space platform, the game gave it the auto-generated name Marwin, so I naturally changed it to Marvin, after my good robot friend from Warptorio. The main thing I want to change is giving it way more cargo space, both so I can take more stuff to new planets, and so I can bring back more resources from those planets. I'm also gonna reuse the thruster design, since it's probably good enough for an endgame ship anyway. But I can't spend 10 minutes explaining every new ship, so here's the finished version. It's bulkier than before, but it just has more of everything. I could have probably done better with planning solar panel placement, but oh well, it's good enough. Our next trip will be to Fulgora, and now I can bring a whole factory's worth of supplies with me. The main difference between Fulgora and other planets in terms of preparation is that you should definitely bring some trains and elevated rails. You'll see why when we land there. And while waiting for the ship to fill up with cargo, I have some chores to take care of, like setting up another oil field, and clearing out more biters that got too close to the pollution cloud. Also, I've set up production for the new 4th tier of belts on Vulcanus, since that's the only planet they can be produced on. Well, enough waiting around, time to get up to our new ship and start flying. The trip is pretty much the same as the one to Vulcanus, and now our ship is better, so it's smooth sailing. And here we are. Welcome, dear viewers, to Fulgora. And here you can see the main gimmick on Fulgora, lightning storms. This planet is the ruined remains of a long-lost civilization, and as such some of their technology is still here, like these lightning rods, that are the only safe place from the storms that come every night. And the resource system on Fulgora is a bit unique. Mining this vault ruin gives us the ability to process scrap, and just look at this recipe. Scrap has a chance to give us any of these items, and it's the only resource available on this planet. And as you might have noticed, the whole planet is tiny islands separated by this ocean that we can't build anything on. So that's why we brought all those elevated rails. The smaller islands have very rich patches of scrap, but not enough room to build on. The larger islands, on the other hand, have plenty of room but little to no scrap. So the first thing to do is set up a rail line that will transport the scrap from the smaller island over to the bigger one. And we get to use the big mining drills we brought over from Vulcanus, so that's gonna be a lot of scrap, even from this tiny patch. We also get to make our own lightning collectors. Anything not covered by this blue circle will probably get destroyed by lightning, so we're gonna need lots of them. But the lightning isn't all bad. It's gonna be our main source of power. Whenever lightning strikes the collectors, it gets transformed into electricity for a brief moment. But luckily that electricity can be stored in accumulators, and we're gonna be using a lot of them. Now that we have the scrap flowing, it's time to take this train over to the other island and start figuring out the base. First thing to do is start covering the island with lightning rods and accumulators. And here's the core building of Fulgora, the recycler. As you might be able to guess, it can automate the scrap recycling for us. I think later on I'll realize it was stupid to plan for 4 belts of mixed scrap recycling, but right now I'm sadly a prisoner of my past mistakes. I made this 4-lane item sorter so I can make something more organized out of this whole mess. But that's just the start of what we need. There is once again no water on this planet, so the only way to get it is by melting the ice that comes from recycling. And there's one unique resource we get from recycling that we haven't seen yet. Holmium. It needs to go into these chemical plants along with water and stone to make holmium solution. And the ocean here is actually heavy oil that we can make use of with an offshore pump. Man, it feels like every planet I go to is like trying to explain an entire overhaul mod. It really can be a bit overwhelming. But anyway, the heavy oil needs to be cracked down using the water from the melted ice, and using that along with the solid fuel we get from recycling, we can make rocket fuel. Just like that, we have all the rocket components available. And by using foundries, we can turn the holmium solution into holmium plates. You can also do this with regular assembling machines if you haven't been to Vulcanus yet, but who would pass up on a free 50% productivity? Using the plates, we can finally make this planet's version of the foundry, the electromagnetic plant. It also has a 50% baseline productivity bonus and 4 module slots, but instead of being used for smelting, it's used for electronics like circuits and modules. I don't think I need to tell you how crazy making circuits and modules with that kind of productivity is. And with how much I'm building, power is a constant issue. There just isn't enough accumulator charge to last through the whole day, so I keep having to build more. We also have no access to standard iron and copper plates here, so I need to recycle the iron gears and copper wire. And I'm once again gonna build a quick bot mall just to make sure I have all the supplies I need on hand. Also some quick green circuits. And then I get tired of my power dying every 5 minutes, so I figured the best way to get more power is to cover most of the island with lightning rods. Now if that doesn't solve the power issues, I don't know what will. Fine, I'll set up some boilers to burn off the water when it gets above a certain level and get us some extra power in the process. Next up, let's finally get to the main reason we're here. Making the science pack. The first thing we'll need are these superconductors. They require plastic, so we'll also need to recycle some of the LDS to get it. We also need this new fluid called electrolyte. It's made by combining heavy oil with holmium solution. Next we combine the electrolyte with superconductors, holmium plates, green circuits and batteries to make supercapacitors. Once we have all that, we can finally make the electromagnetic science pack. They also need accumulators, but requester chests make that pretty easy. But also starting to produce stuff in this base has revealed just how many flaws my design has. Stuff just keeps backing up. So instead of going back to actually design the base properly, I'm just gonna make this loop of recyclers to effectively void whatever backs up. I know that throwing away resources, especially ones like blue circuits and LDS, feels like heresy in Factorio. But one thing you should keep in mind while on other planets is that these resources are effectively infinite, so there's no need to worry about destroying a couple here or there. Well, now that that's not a problem anymore, let's build a rocket. Launching rockets from here will actually be pretty fast, since all the expensive rocket ingredients just come from scrap. So why not make 2 rockets? Well, I think the base is steady enough now, and we're producing all we need from Fulgora, so let's head back up to the spaceship. What we're bringing back to Nauvis is for now a bunch of recyclers and EM plants, holmium plates, superconductors, supercapacitors, and of course some of the science pack. Home sweet home. Now before I go off on more interplanetary adventures, this base needs a bit of an upgrade. And now that we have EM plants, I think it's time for a little circuit redesign. Using the 5 module slots EM plants along with beacons, I can effectively double the amount of circuits we get from the same amount of resource, and in the fraction of the space. It's the same case with red circuits. The only downside to using so many beacons and modules is that the power bill is starting to get a bit high. And finally blue circuits. The nice part about EM plants is that they're just a free upgrade. With foundries you need to import calcite and rebuild your entire smelting setup, but with these it's just set and forget. And since I'm in the mood for upgrading old bases, let's take a quick trip back to Vulcanus to replace all circuit production with EM plants, increase power a bit, and add a second rocket so cargo gets to our spaceships faster. And it's finally time to head over to the last of the 3 starter planets. Now, it was a toss-up for me whether to go to Vulcanus or Fulgora first, but I always knew Gleba was gonna be last. And in a second you'll see why. Welcome to Gleba, a swamp world brimming with life and the biggest headache I've experienced in Factorio yet. Now, to explain why Gleba was such a headache, I need to explain some of its key mechanics. First off, everything on Gleba is organic, even the resources. The only way to get iron and copper on Gleba is from this bacteria. At first it seems useless, but after a minute it spoils into either iron or copper. And that is the second reason why Gleba is, I think, the hardest of the planets. I'll explain spoilage more in detail in a bit, but now here's reasons number 3 and 4. These plants that are the main resource of Gleba and will be needed for all processes. And of course the new Gleba enemy, the pentapods. They work much like biters in that they have spawners and they're attracted to this planet's version of pollution. Also, here's one of the new buildings from Gleba, the heating tower. It takes in anything with a fuel value and turns it into heat, which I'll then use to power heat exchangers and steam turbines to generate power for our base. And because, once again, everything on Gleba is organic, all of it can be burned for heat. This will be important later. But for now we're gonna need the basics again, so time to smelt some iron and copper. And stone is the only resource found normally here, so we'll be turning all of it into landfill since it's used a lot on Gleba. Alright, enough beating around the many bushes of this planet. It's time to get some actual base building going. These assembling machines will be used to process the 2 types of plants found here on Gleba. and that processing will be the heart of the entire base. We'll also need this planet's special building, the biochamber, but annoyingly, crafting it requires pentapod eggs, so I need to go off and destroy some of their nests to get more. Thankfully, I brought over some rockets from Nauvis to make this easy. Biochambers are used for pretty much every process on Gleba, and instead of using electricity to work, you need to feed them a constant stream of nutrients. Gleba processes are all very interconnected, so I feel like it would be easier to explain them all in sequence. First, you need plants. There are two different kinds, Yomako and Jellynut. They're grown out in specific areas of the map, the ones colored bright yellow for Yomako and the ones colored magenta for Jellynut. Then you bring the fruits over to your base and process them into Yomako mash and jelly. Then you take the mash and jelly and combine them in a biochamber to get bioflux. And then you need to take some of that bioflux and turn it into nutrients, but as you might have guessed, we need nutrients before we can start making more nutrients, and it's all a giant mess. And that's not even mentioning the fact that everything spoils, and it spoils at different rates, and it can spoil inside your machines and stop them from ever working. Honestly, I probably should have done some research on Gleba before just stranding myself here. Maybe it's just me, but the entire chain of processes just wasn't clicking. I tried a few different designs, but there was always something going wrong and killing the entire thing. So at one point I just went into an editor world to test out designs without having to spend 15 minutes cleaning up spoilage on belts every time one didn't work. I don't feel good about this, but I just ended up designing the whole base on a different save and just importing it here. Call me a bad engineer if you must, but if I had to go manually dispose of another 5,000 spoilage, I would have lost it. So here's the blueprint. It might all come pre-designed, but I think it's probably still the hardest base to explain, so try to follow along. The plants come into these two rows of assembling machines and get processed. Then these filter splitters separate any seeds and put them into provider chests that our bots will take back to the fields for replanting. After that, the main rule I followed for all products is to put them onto a bus, and every time I split off the bus, I would route it back in after it gets to all machines. Like for example here, the mash and jelly get split off to make bioflux, but after reaching the end of the line of biochambers, the belt keeps going and merges back into the main line. Sticking to this throughout all the factory will make sure no belt starts clogging up with spoilage at the end. And to make sure that no machine starts backing up with spoilage inside of it, from now on every single machine that can accept a spoilable ingredient will have a dedicated inserter filtered to take out spoilage onto a separate belt. After the bioflux is of course nutrients, since none of this base will work without a steady supply of them. But as you know by now, if you've successfully followed along with this mess of a planet, you need nutrients to start making bioflux so you can make more nutrients. So we also have this single assembler controlled by a circuit condition to make nutrients out of Yomako mash to kickstart the process and as a failsafe in case it ever runs dry. From there, mash, jelly, bioflux, nutrients and spoilage all go on their own separate main belt, and anytime they're needed they get split off, used in whatever process, and then merged back into said main belt to keep going upwards through the base. After that is a mechanic I haven't even touched on yet. Pentapod egg growing. Basically, you take pentapod eggs along with water and massive amounts of nutrients and you duplicate them. This seems fairly simple, and it would be if it wasn't for the fact that pentapod eggs spoil, and if you let them spoil, they hatch into actual pentapods that will start wreaking havoc across your base, so better make sure that never happens. The pentapod eggs are only used in this planet's science pack, so thankfully this little setup here can be its own closed loop. Here's how you make iron and copper on Gleba. And yes, this is an absolutely ridiculous amount of belt spaghetti, don't ask. I have no good excuse for myself. Basically, you can just duplicate iron and copper bacteria by feeding it bioflux and nutrients. And I've been talking a lot about plants and seeds, but I've never actually shown you how it works. These are the agricultural towers. Basically, every green square here is a valid place to plant a tree, and after a certain amount of time, the tower breaks the tree and outputs fruit. On the right side of the base here are just some basic oil products that you can make with alternative biological recipes. Not much more to say that I already haven't. And very importantly, for this whole design to work, here where the belts end and there's no more base to feed, anything that hasn't been used yet, as well as any spoilage present on belts, goes up and into our heating towers to be disposed of and to keep the electricity running. Also, I had the small problem of my fruits coming in at very different times, and by the time the second fruit type was coming into the base, the first was already spoiling. So I thought this was a great place to use another new space age mechanic: wireless circuit signals. Basically, you can use radars to transmit circuit signals over any distance as long as it's on the same planet. So here I'll read each of the seed input belts and hook them up into radars that will then output at the other seed input belt and only enable them if seeds are present on both belts at the same time. Is this solution actually good? Probably not, but I wanted to use this feature somewhere. After that, it's finally time for some normal Factorio processes after all that biological pain. Some furnaces to smelt the iron and copper, and because I was feeling lazy, I just shove all of it into provider chests, and from here bots will make everything else. I'm already making rocket fuel with the bio recipe, so all I really need are a bit of blue circuits and low density structures. Oh yeah, and because it's Gleba, the science pack spoils too, because why wouldn't it? Well, at least now I think I finally have the base somewhat working. It was a pain to build and test, but honestly, it looks pretty cool now. Now let's build ourselves a rocket and finally get back to Nauvis. I'm actually afraid of what modders will eventually do with this expansion and all its new mechanics, if even the baseline version is this insane. It almost feels strange going back to regular old Nauvis after spending like 8 hours straight on Gleba. And during those hours spent on Gleba, I've unsurprisingly been doing some research. So let me show you the fruits of that research. This is the new tier of armor we now have, the mech armor. Looks awesome, has a 10x12 equipment grid at base quality level, and best of all, it flies. No more getting blocked by your own factory, or annoyances like cliffs or lava or even oceans. You can just fly over all of it now. Since I'm gonna be here on Nauvis for a while, let's also add some extra spaceships to carry around cargo between the planets. I'll just use the same blueprint, and I'll of course be naming them Marvin II and Marvin III. And since I've now transcended my mortal flesh and become one with the machine, imperfections like my old starter base are simply not acceptable anymore. Given that I'm in the mood for nukes, I think the biters are overdue for a visit.
Nuclear launch detected.
Ah, a freshly irradiated map. What more could you want from life? Well, you could always want a bigger factory, so that's exactly what I'm gonna build next. I've been wanting to make a factory using all the new buildings, so here's what I've come up with for smelting. This might look somewhat like a mega base design from 1.0, but I think the mega base designs now are gonna look a bit crazier. Do I need a whole new base? No, probably not. I'm pretty sure I can comfortably beat the game with just the base I already have. But it would be a shame to make a whole video without using the new buildings, so... Well, there goes like 5 hours of gameplay. But now we have this cool new base. The main point here is to make significantly more science, since a lot of the technologies in the late game require some ridiculous numbers of science packs. And of course, being able to launch way more rockets. And speaking of launching rockets, let's send up the space platform for our Aquilo ship. This is what the Aquilo ship looks like. Significantly bigger, and now using advanced asteroid processing to get access to more resources and more efficient recipes. And added rocket turrets, as well as production for rockets and red ammo on board. That's because Aquilo is significantly farther away than the first 3 planets, and will also start encountering big asteroids, which are pretty much impervious to just bullets. And while we wait for that to get built, let's get some module mass production going. All the tier 3 modules require different items from other planets, so I'll just bring those in by requester chest. Also, before we head to the last planet, let me show you another crazy mechanic. Biter captivity. Using bioflux from Gleba, we can capture biter nests using special rockets. And once captured, we can keep feeding them bioflux and they'll produce biter eggs for us. They're pretty much exactly like pentapod eggs in that they spoil and will turn into biters and start chewing through your base. They're used in Productivity Module Freeze, and also in one of the most useful buildings in the whole game, the Bio Lab. This is basically just a huge normal lab, and the reason it's so good is that on top of having 4 module slots, it also has 50% science pack consumption. That means a flat 50% increase in research per science pack, which stacks with regular productivity. So that new science setup I built like 2 seconds ago? Yeah, I have to tear that all down and rebuild. Probably not optimal design, but it looks cool. And since tier 3 prod mods need biter eggs, let's put down some laser turrets just in case. Also, let's finally set the requests up in the ship and get all these new rockets flying. This ship has to be in the top 5 most spaghetti things I've ever built. And the cargo hold has even less free space than the rest of the platform. Aquilo is the only planet that isn't meant to be done without imports from other planets. So in addition to all the usual buildings, you want to bring some nuclear fuel, as well as some of the special intermediates from all the other planets. And here's those big asteroids. When flying here, it's important to set target filters on your turrets, to not waste rockets on small asteroids and bullets on big ones. Well, we ended up taking a single hit, but what matters is the ship survived. Welcome, dear viewers, to Sea Block. I mean Frostpunk. I mean Aquilo. A frozen ocean planet with basically no resources. The main gimmick on Aquilo is that it's too cold for anything to work, so you need a way to warm things up. And that's where the nuclear reactors and imported fuel come in. To make it simple, every building on Aquilo needs to be touching a heat pipe in some way, else it just won't work. The ocean here isn't just water, it's a mix of ammonia and trace amounts of ice. So to get actual water, we need to process the ammonia in a chemical plant and then melt the ice separately. And here's Aquilo's special building, the cryogenic plant. It doesn't have inbuilt productivity like the other buildings, but it does come with a whole 8 module slots. Very weird to see a vanilla building with this many module slots, but I'm not complaining. And here's why I compared this planet to Sea Block. We're stuck on a tiny ice platform that we need to expand with our own ice platforms made by processing the ammonia. Also, most of the ice is too unstable to build on directly, so we need to cover it with concrete first. There are a few resources here apart from ammonia and ice, some regular old crude oil, and also 2 new liquids, lithium brine and fluorine. Alright, I think at this point I have the general idea of how this planet works, so time to tear down this base and build something more usable. First up is ammonia processing. And yeah, this underground belt and pipe weaving in between heat pipes is gonna be a trend here. Next is ice melting, since water is not only needed for a bunch of other processes, but it's also the only way we get power, so it's pretty important. Any excess ice is then split off to be turned into extra ice platforms to give us more space to build with. After that, we need to combine the lithium brine with ammonia and holmium plates from Fulgora to make lithium. Then the lithium goes into furnaces to become lithium plates. I also need to go off and grab the single fluorine deposit that's anywhere near my base and pipe it all the way back so I can combine it with lithium, ammonia and solid fuel to make hot fluoroketane. But hot fluoroketane is useless by itself, so first we need to cool it down in a cryogenic plant. And then finally we can use the cold fluoroketane along with lithium plates and ice to make the cryogenic science pack. It also spits out hot fluoroketane again, but all we need to do is route it back into the initial tank. And wire up the assembler to only make more hot fluoroketane when the tank falls below a certain level so we never back up on the stuff. Honestly, no idea if it's just because I've played so many overhaul mods, but apart from figuring out heat pipe placement, these recipes seemed surprisingly approachable for the last planet of the game. Look at this mess of pipes and underground belts. If you're a fan of Italian pasta, this expansion is definitely for you. Now, the Aquilo base is working, but if I left it like this, it will eventually stop working. So I set up requests on our Aquilo ship and send it back to Nauvis, so it will automatically keep the base supplied with all the rocket ingredients, as well as nuclear fuel and science pack ingredients. But while I'm stuck here waiting for the ship to make its round trip, I might as well increase science production, since with only 2 cryo plants it'll take me forever to get enough science packs. And of course rocket silos, which I don't have the materials for until the ship comes back. So instead I decide to go fly over and explore the planet a bit. And yup, it's literally just ocean as far as the eye can see. This is the 5th planet I've seen this on, but I'm still not tired of watching the first rockets fly off. It's just so satisfying. But the science pack isn't the only thing we need from Aquilo, so we're not ready to leave yet. First we'll need these quantum processors, which would be a nightmare to make, unless we had logistics bots of course. Then we need to use those processors to make railguns, this absolutely massive turret that will need to beat the game. Aquilo also comes with a new source of power, fusion power. It isn't actually needed to beat the game, but I can't miss the opportunity to use it at least once in this video. Well, now we're actually done with Aquilo, and I'm starting to get a bit cold, so let's finally get back to Nauvis and get to winning the game. As the very perceptive among you might have noticed, I didn't win the game by launching a rocket. Shocking, I know. Instead, the new win condition is making a ship capable of interstellar travel and flying it out of the solar system. So let's send up the final space platform of this run. And here's the new ship. Maybe I should actually include the process of building these in the video, but I was lazy and basically just reused all the interesting things, so there isn't much to explain. There are a few key differences though. First off, railguns. Flying out of the solar system will have us encountering massive asteroids that even rockets can't scratch. So that's why we need the biggest available gun. I'll never get tired of looking at the space platform building animation. I mean, look at it. Also, unlike every other ship in this video, this one isn't solar powered, since solar power gets weaker the further you get from the sun. Instead, we have a whole fusion reactor on board, providing 100 megawatts continuously. The only other big difference is the need to include railgun ammo production on board. I could have probably made this ship like half the size, but oh well, let's hope it can fly. Well, here's the ship fully working. I also added some extra belt loops to act as ammo storage, since you can't use chests on space platforms. Anyway, let's take our rocket into space one final time. As expected, the trip to Gleba was very uneventful with only small and medium asteroids. The trip to Aquilo was much the same, even without the railguns since they're filtered to attack only huge asteroids. And finally, time to set course for the solar system's edge. And here's the first time we can see the railguns firing. The distance to the solar system's edge is over 3 times longer than the trip to Aquilo, so you'll need a ship capable of producing lots of ammo and fuel in transit. The first half of the trip goes smoothly, but then the gun turret ammo started running low, so I had to fiddle with the filters and let rocket turrets attack smaller asteroids as well. And then the rocket turrets started running out of ammo too, so I let the railguns hit big and medium asteroids. But even that wasn't enough. Asteroids smash into the hull, destroying belts and turrets as they go. And just as the ammo belt was cut off, we made it. In just under 50 hours, we've beaten Space Age for the very first time. I had high expectations going into this expansion, and I can confidently say that all those expectations were absolutely crushed. In terms of how much content is in the game, this isn't just Factorio 2. This is Factorio 2, 3, and 4, and that's just counting the things I've done so far. There's a whole endgame gameplay loop that seems much more fleshed out than just launching rockets. But I won't be going into that in this video. You can discover that stuff for yourself. But for now, this is farewell, dear viewers. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see ya!